This lecture is being brought to you in part by the generous gifts of these sponsors.
Good? 50-50, I will not have a voice in 40 minutes, and I talk wildly with my hands, so at some point we're going to have to do some translation, but it's guaranteed. So this title is titled Horribly, and I'll give a little bit of a backstory. So Walk This Way, has anybody seen Mel Brooks movies? I wanted to make this whole thing Mel Brooks based. Turns out I'm not creative enough for that. Or How I Learned to Start Worrying About Walking, Stanley Kubrick, Dr. Strangelove. I wanted to make it Dr. Strangelove themed. Turns out I wasn't creative enough for that. So you mash them together and you get a presentation that is more scientific than creative, which I think is okay. But I think it does tell a nice story of something like walking that we take incredibly for granted is something that we've evolved to do over 7 million years. And if we lose that function, generally not very good. So we're going to start off from pessimistic, and then slowly through the talk, I hope we get a bit more optimistic of ways that we can improve our health across the lifespan. Well, that's a good start. So 2 disclosures. One, I am going to present some data on a molecule that we have a patent for. Nobody wants it, but we have to be somewhat clear about that. And then the goal of this is, after this lecture, I want you all to look to the person next to you and goes, if he says exercise one more time, I'm going to jump him in the parking lot. So the goal is to show the importance of physical activity and exercise, not just for lifespan, health span, for the things that we want, but clear empirical data that shows why it's important. You're a smart audience, you know that, but I'm going to reinforce it so much you're going to hate me. So the current state of the human, probably not that great. I think we can agree it's this. Right? Now why this is kind of, I think this is more enlightening than a little gag. It's someone that knows the importance of physical activity. They buy a treadmill. They've probably used it a few times. Life happens. It gets stuck in the garage or wherever this is, and it becomes something that it's not supposed to be, clothes hanger, whatever. But that's not what we're supposed to be. Over the past 7 million years, we have evolved to be bipedal. We have evolved to walk, to be physically active, to move from place to place, gather food, move habitats, go after prey, all that nice stuff. And in the past 300 years, we've evolved to be the humans that we are now. And in the past 50 years, we've turned into that. So 50 years of a lifestyle behavior, mostly in Western societies, against 7 million years. So as we became bipedal, we are meant to be active and we are meant to physically move around our environment. When we remove that, I forgot I put this in. So we'll go through a few more things and get to the punchline. We became bipedal to become metabolically efficient. So as we start to, obviously we can't go back 4 million years, take one of our ancestors, put them on a VO2 max cart, get after them, hammer them on a test. But we can kind of look at what happens with chimps. And they're quadrupeds, obviously. They have to use multiple limbs to walk. We look at ground reaction forces. We look at the amount of energy that their joints are putting out. And then we have what we call the cost of transport, the metabolic cost of transport, how much energy we need to generate to walk a certain amount of distance. We want to be low. So humans compared to chimpanzees, both bipedal and quadrupedal. And this is largely because we use less muscle and we use our ankles. Now I'll show at the end, this is going to sound somewhat derogatory because a lot of us are older here. As we age, we start to walk more like a chimpanzee. We shift from the ankle up to the knee and up to the hips. Because of that, we walk wider. We have to use more of our larger muscles, which take more energy, and we walk slower. I'm not calling you chimpanzees. But I think the most important thing of being bipedal is it frees our hands, right? And this point is important, and I'll show you later in the section of the independence and importance of having free hands as we both evolved. And we can check this chap out. And you can kind of imagine how our ancestors did this. So we all stuff our face when we go to the kitchen, but it's important to be able to walk and carry with 2 hands other food. So, 5 million years ago, this put us at an advantageous position as a species because now we're not localized to a specific part of the forest or the grasslands. We can take stuff, move stuff. If we have a store of food, we can use our developing brain to start to make tools and things that help get prey, protect ourselves, make specialized things for fishing, and what humans do with their hands, tools and art. Now, elevating the sight lines, I think this makes kind of sense. Some of you might be risk takers. Tell me what you prefer. This or that? I don't prefer either of them, to be honest, because one, there's a huge 400-pound cat that I can see, and the other, you don't know what's there. But I would think I would rather want this, not to be 10 meters away from them, but 100 meters, where you see a potential danger, you can mitigate around it, you can plan. It doesn't have to be a super cool cat. It could be a cliff, a raging river, just something where you can plan and strategize. And because of that, we need metabolic efficiency to be able to adapt to it. And then one of the other things is our ability to thermoregulate. As we evolved, we have to be able to cover these large spaces. Even if you're metabolically efficient and you can't shed off heat, you're not going to go very far. So all of these strategies have come together to basically allow us to do this takeaway. It's like we evolved to be active. We have to be active. And how do we know that we have to be active? Because we die when we aren't, right? That's the pessimistic punchline I was trying to get to and we can go up. So Frank Booth, who is a pioneer in the field of exercise biology, exercise physiology, and activity behavior, did one of my favorite reviews where he put together strong evidence that being physically inactive is highly correlated or can cause up to 35 different disease states, chronic disease states. 35 is a lot. And we typically think of being inactive and having not doing any type of exercise, cardiovascular disease, cardiometabolic health, the big ones. But this is across the system. Cardiovascular disease, cardiometabolic disease. Neurological, it affects your cognitive function, mood disorders, affects reproductive systems, digestive systems. Everything that you can imagine being inactive kind of destroys. Greatly reduces our lifespan, as we can see here. So maximal METs, so this is our fancy exercise physiology or metabolism term called metabolic equivalent of tasks, call it METs. Right now, as you're sitting down here, is about 1.5 METs. So you're not really doing that much, right? And it makes sense. If your maximal ability is sitting, probably not going to make it very long. But as we get healthier and healthier, we get to around this inflection point, and this is seen in 3 different studies. The ones in color are from the same study, males and females. Females on the bottom, males on the top. We get to this inflection point of about 10 METs. So that's a VO2 max of around 30, 35, which is average for a 40 to 45-year-old, below average for a young adult. And you might be thinking, oh, I just have to get to this point and I'll be good, if nothing happens. So you have a knee injury, you gain a little weight, your VO2 max, your ability to go up skyrockets, or your mortality risk goes up. So what we want is you to be here. So 18, this is around 63 milligrams per kilogram per minute of oxygen consumption, which is highly trained. So you're pretty fit. That's across the lifespan. If you're an 80-year-old pushing 63, it's like, oh, solid. And but you can see if something happens, you have a huge reserve to combat that. So right here is going to be a subjective choice of mine, and I could get data to find it, but I was too lazy, that this is physical activity. If you're generally physically active, you can be around here, walking around, walking the dog, have good diet, being relatively physically active, what our ancestors would have been. And this is with exercise training. So this is why we always push exercise versus physical activity. Physical activity is great. You want progressive exercise to give you this physiologic reserve to combat something that might happen. When I used to teach undergrads, when I still like them, we taught about this as a bank account for your body. Your savings account for the body. You don't really want to dip into your savings account, but it's nice if you have $1 million and you need to. You want to buy a yacht or something super cool. Or you have something that's unforeseen, that's catastrophic. You lose a car that's totaled. If you have that reserve, you go from 18 to 14. You get better, you go back up. What you don't want to be is have something here happen and you lose that reserve. So when you go here, I want you to go home and train tonight and just think, got to get 18, got to get 18. I don't know what Mets are anymore, but that guy up there told me to get 18. So now we're going to kind of shift this to walking. This has been exercise. You're already sick of hearing it. We think of walking, we think of steps, and we think of step counts, and we think of, I need to get 10,000 steps. Why is 10,000? Because it has a 10 in it, it has a lot of zeros, and 5 digits is bigger than 4 digits. There. Yeah, that's it, 10,000. It's about 4, depending on your stride length, 4.5 miles, 6.5 miles per day of walking is around 10,000 steps. We can compare, obviously, again, we can't go back into find a fossil record and one of our ancestors has an Apple Watch on. You're like, oh, convenient. You walked 25,000 steps today. But there are contemporary hunter-gatherer societies that still exist, and they have been tracked before. These are from Tanzania and Peru, and this hunter-gatherer society is around 18 to 20,000 steps a day doing the things that they need to do to exist. Now, again, human variability. Other studies showed 10,000. That's what it is. That's what science is. Incredibly variable stuff that shows kind of a similar pattern. So we're going to assume that hunter-gatherers are around 15 to 20,000 steps per day to do the things that they need to do. And here's us. Again, highly variable, human industrialized. I forget what the definition of that is. But again, this could be different technologies, accelerometer of a phone versus an old school pedometer versus a watch. Who knows what these techniques are? A good scientist that I am not would have looked in them and could give justification for what that was. And then another contemporary one that could be a modern society that lives by pre-industrial rules are the Amish. And the Amish males walk around 20,000 steps a day. Amish females around 50,000 steps a day. On their day of rest, it'd be different tour, like they do different stuff in that part of the community. But on their day of rest, God's day, they outperform other people. So that's a consideration of the constraints that their beliefs put on them. They put in this much volume, and this is us. So how many steps are needed? Yep, that's the answer. No one knows. But we have some data that shows that there's a really good point right here around 6,000 steps per day across all of these disease states that show that 6,000 steps is kind of ubiquitous across all these disease states. So all-cause mortality, cardiovascular disease, cancer. So this is a big meta-analysis study where they collected 34 different reports, did some fancy math that I don't understand, and then showed this stuff. So again, just similar patterns of relationship. Hazard ratio means risk of developing, so you want to be low. 6,000. We can remember 6,000, right? You can say, that guy told me 6,000 was good, so I'm going to get 6,000. And the only one that goes up with more walking, so the furthest here is 12, falls. And it makes sense. You walk more, you're going to fall. If you're walking that makes kind of sense. So how much do we actually walk as technology has improved and we've started to get more and more, technology improves and we can collect data on a massive scale. We can collect it across the world. Like I did it. I did not do this. Smarter people than me, with a lot more money than me, were able to do this study where they collected data over 700,000 people across the world for a collected 63 million physical activity days. So you get a pretty good metric, but again, it's a phone-based app. You have to volunteer to be a part of the study, so there's those types of things. But the average American is around 4,500 steps with a huge standard deviation. So that means there's a lot of variance between those that can walk and those that don't walk, or those that can walk but don't walk, and all of those. So in general, 70% of the US population walks between 2,000 steps and 6,000 steps. That's kind of what that comes to. So if we go back, we're right here at this inflection point for most of us. So this group did a follow-up study that asked an interesting question. What happens if you go to a city known for its walkability? In this study, they made this walkability index where you look at the environment of a place, public transportation, how can you drive, how are the streets, I can't remember the exact details of what they did, but New York, Boston, San Francisco came up as top. Things like Jacksonville, Houston, Oklahoma City came up as not walker friendly. There's like 35 different cities in there, and I'm probably unnecessarily making fun of one of those. But what happens if you go from those cities to New York, the most walkable city in the US? By default, you walk 3,000 steps more. That's just what happens. 60% of New Yorkers don't have a car. So when I lived in New York, when I lived in Astoria, Queens, 10-minute walk to the bus station or to the subway, transfer 2 trains. If a station's down, you have to walk 4 more blocks. You want to go to the grocery store. You accumulate walking for your existence. And what happens if you go from New York to least walkable cities? You lose about 3,000 steps. I'm actually unfairly exaggerating, 2,500 steps. May as well be accurate when we have the data in front of us, right? So basically, if there's an environment for you to walk in, people typically walk in it. I think that's understood. Tons of caveats to that, though. There are barriers that exist everywhere. So this was a study that was done, a survey study done in London. I use New York because I like New York more than London. Of the types of things that people said why they don't walk or why they do walk. So barriers to being able to walk. Infrastructure is the big one. Pedestrian-only paths. I'm sure some of you that have ran across 3 Mile Bridge, there's some idiot going 30 miles an hour on an e-bike. It's not very fun when you're trying to do that. And that idiot was me. Maintain sidewalks. Can you walk in your neighborhood safely? I live in East Hill. There aren't even sidewalks there. Or there's 1 block of a sidewalk that goes into the street. And East Hill, if anybody else lives there, knows that people just kind of fly through those things. They ignore stoplights, or there's no stoplights there. They ignore stop signs. So crosswalks and traffic. Now, East Hill is a bit more manageable if you were trying to do this down Broadway, right? But in Broadway, you just punch the cabbie, you punch the driver, and you just move on your day. And then things like pollution. Is it actually healthily to go out and walk? These are all related to traffic, well, crosswalks, not so much. And then access to green space. So anybody been to New York? This is the backyard of Manhattan, totally crowded, tons of physical activity because I'm gonna walk to the park. How easy is it to walk to a place where it's very walkable? And if you're anywhere in Manhattan, go to Central Park. If you're in the Bronx, you go to Van Cortlandt. If you're in Astoria, you go to Astoria Park, Brooklyn, Prospect Park, and nobody cares about Staten Island, so you don't go there. Then infrastructure, you can change this. This can be cured with money. That's easy enough. Have enough money, build pedestrian-only paths, and have somebody there with a bat when a cyclist goes by, just smash him. For community and personal, a big one, it hurts to walk. You probably don't want to walk in pain, and you probably don't want to put 6,000 steps in if your knee hurts, if your hip hurts. There is nowhere worth walking to. I live in East Hill, it's pretty nice. Where do you walk? Jitterbug, I mean, it's pretty good. And then you walk to the bay, and that's pretty good as well. What if you don't have that? What's the point of walking? A big one, anxiety about exercise, public exercising, being judged, those types of things that happen to people that make them not want to do it. The big social part, no one to walk with, exercise is a group study. You know, Dr. Bauman is leading a study here, and they have groups of people that like to come and they train because it's their new social group. They're there for 22 weeks, you meet new friends. Coming to the gym is being a part of the study, but now it's to do something with your friends, and they talk to themselves and they go do stuff. So it's a huge part. And then others, feeling of personal safety. Are you going to get mugged, or are you going to get stabbed walking to a subway, which happens in some parts of New York? So those are the barriers that affect that stuff. Oh, and there we go. Now I know you're wondering, that cute kid is me. And so there was supposed to be a slide there where I just didn't jump to like weird pictures of myself. But so that's overview. Walking's important. Physical activity is important. You get that. You hate me. We're good. Now, why I started to worry about walking personally. So you can't really see here. I'm clearly a baby. Now I get a little older and it's hard to see, but I have orthotic ankle braces on my left leg and my right leg. These are plastic things that your parents put on you. You walk to the bus, you get on the bus, you take them off because they were uncomfortable. And this is me when I was 12. A left Achilles tendon lengthening surgery done at the same time as a tensor fasciolateral lengthening surgery on my right leg. I had to put pressure on this the next day. So after 12 hours, I had to be able to walk on a lengthened Achilles tendon surgery. And if you'll notice, a cat doing what cats does, they find the most disabled person and they stand right in front of them. So, you are actually speaking with something that's very rare, a person under 50 that got paralytic polio. So I'm 41. My watch tells me I'm 34. Again, I don't want to make fun of the crowd, but I'm sure a lot of the people in here are familiar with the polio virus, lived through it. I got it in 1984, so my immune system was an idiot. Got the polio vaccine, and it was just like, no, we're good, you're good. And then at some point, they're like, oh, okay, this isn't so great. And luckily, it stopped at my waist, so it didn't affect my diaphragm. It didn't move up to upper limb bodies. But substantial weakness and paralysis, paralyzed till I was 2. Functionally paralyzed, couldn't walk. Used a walker, that image of me with the braces on, I think I was 5. Don't even know how old I was. But that's the key one. We all know weakness and paralysis of the muscle affects. But the unique thing about polio is it kills the motor neurons. And if you kill a motor neuron, you have no muscle fibers. It's true denervation. Even when you're at bed rest for extended periods of times, you don't really have a lot of denervation if you're a young adult. You just lose muscle fiber, or you lose fiber size, but you keep the same amount of fibers for the most part. So when you recover, you go back to where you were normally. If you're older, it's a little bit more complicated, but that's the gist of it. When you lose those motor neurons, there's nothing to recover. You have what you have. So, so there's the downer. So we, went to death. Now we're to chronic disease. We're going to get up. But as you can see, I'm very excited for my first Achilles tendon surgery. So this is when I was 7. Bilateral Achilles tendon surgeries at the same time. So lengthen the left, lengthen the right, hanging out in a wheelchair for a bit, but I got a Game Boy. Because you have secondary effects like I had, which is foot drop, increased muscle tone where I only walked on my tiptoes on both legs, weirdly, because I had a weird gait, because I didn't have any muscles. So those things don't take, as a lot of surgeries don't. You have to go in and have another one. So that's why I had to have a second one on the left. And because I was trying to change how I walked in those years, they had to lengthen that right portion so I could basically swing myself while walking, and I'll show some images of how I actually have to do that. Well, not images, videos. So why I really started to worry about walking was post-polio syndrome. So, you're happy. You're like, oh, cool, I have this thing that happened to me. I'm doing good. Obviously, playing baseball, can't run very well, but I could hit, could pitch, could throw, have fun as a kid. I wrestled horrible. It turns out wrestling is pretty much dictated by how strong your trunk, legs, and thighs are. If you don't have those muscles, you go like 1 in 36. But what it did do is exercise, resistance train at the start. So this was when I think I was 12, or not 12, that's ridiculous, 13 or 14. I was resistance trained then. So I've been resistance training since I was about 13 years old. And because that's what you do. You don't know that you don't know what post-polio syndrome is. So you get a little bit older, you start to look into it, and your doctor says, hey, keep an eye out for this. And this is when those remaining motor neurons just call it a day. They said, we had a good life, but we're done. So all those muscles that were innervated no longer function, or they function poorer. The axons that those recovered to preserve are long, so you have severe loss in muscle function, muscle tone, muscle ability, and quality of life. Happens in your 30s and 40s. So as I was starting to get into my 30s and now in my early 40s, anytime I'm like, I'm a little weak. Oh God, here it is, post-polio. It hasn't happened yet, right? So you lose the ability to walk. Sucks, terrible. People have done that. But it really affects muscles that weren't originally affected, especially muscles to eat and swallow. I particularly like to eat food, as most people here probably do. And then it affects things that weren't typically affected by the injury or the disease before. So it'll affect upper body muscles that you didn't know were affected. But it also put me into a position where you can do one of two things. Back in the day, this is one of the things that exercise was actually contraindicated for. One of the few things where people would go, if you exercise too much, you could accelerate the onset of this. And in the science of the day, that made a lot of sense. They don't have a lot. You don't want to stress what they have. Or the way that I thought about it is if it does come, I want to be pretty fit if it does happen. And if it does happen, I want to be able to do cool stuff before it does happen. And I think I said the same thing, slightly different. So I know a few of you that I've talked to have this disease as well. You get what's called uncurable mountain syndrome. So pretty much from the time I started graduate school, I've done everything I can to walk and interact with mountains and hiking and all that nice stuff. So on the left is my Ph.D. advisor, Phil Gallagher. So I can ski. I have to have outriggers, so you can kind of see here, which are skis for your hands. What you can't see is that the top of my skis are actually, we drilled a hole through them and we tethered them because I'm not strong enough to stop if I reverse pizza, if that makes sense. And then you just fall or you're at risk for injury. So we restrict how that is, so I can always pizza. I can always stop. But I can't get out of the lift. So I'm that annoying person that asks for a full stop, and then I have to have two people pull me up. The benefits of this, and this is a note for all of you, if you have somebody that's in an adaptive ski program at Breckenridge, first of the line to the lift no matter what. So, and I'm not going to say this to disparage Phil. He paid for my trip to Breckenridge. But then other things that are pretty friendly, even if you can't walk very much, or I walk a lot, walk very well, I should say. Rock climbing, this is up in the gunk, so trad climbing, putting gear in. Now, these aren't super technical routes, but the cool thing about climbing is usually you have to hike to get to them. And so I didn't so much do resistance training through my time in grad school, but avid rock climber, mountain biker, things along those lines. And that this disease is getting worse. So, kind of show you how I have to maintain this. This is not a leg exercise by any means. I basically post hole up with trekking poles. This is a 25% incline. I say this with weird detail because I looked it up before I came here to make sure I knew. This is Mount Ashland out in Oregon, or Mount Woodson out in Ashland, Oregon. 25 to 30% incline for 800 feet. It's easy. My heart rate was 160 for that whole duration, but the RPE, how I felt, it actually didn't feel that bad. This was not challenging technically for me. You kind of put your leg up, you go up. However, this minor creek crossing in Ken's backyard in Alaska Basin in the Tetons.
Just one giant.
Now I hope that my friends aren't swearing. I forgot that we can mute this for the rest of the lecture if we want. But a simple creek crossing. I have to have some type of strategy because I can't fall. There's like a legitimate fall risk of slipping on a pebble if I want to step into the water, which is fine. You might slip on that. So something as hard as this, piece of cake, no rest, just crush it. Something like that little creek bed takes a actual strategy to cross. Now, I have a friend with me. His name is, it'll be on the next one. So here is my friend. His name's Ethan. We call him New Jeff. He replaced my hiking friend called Jeff, so he doesn't have a name. He's just New Jeff. So this is in Iceland. This is a 2-mile trek down. This is the most aggressive mile of it. So this is 1.5 or 1,500 feet in a mile. So this 2-mile trek that goes back here took me 3.5 hours. I could crush that uphill, averaging 1.8 to 2.2 miles an hour without a problem. But downhills are pretty gnarly. And so my friend Jake is the one recording because, as you do, you want your friends to fall because it's funny. So that's why he's doing it. But New Jeff is an ED doc and wilderness trained. So the best person to have in a situation like this. So this is every step of that 1,500 feet. Little baby steps. Because I have no knee extensors. I can't force down, and I have to step on my tiptoes on every step where I could slip. So post hole down, little baby steps, post hole down, and it just shreds your lats. So at the end of this hiking trip, a downhill, which most people would bomb this in 30 minutes. My buddy Jake did it in 25 minutes and came back up. 3.5 hours. But worth it, right? So this is the Lagavegger Trail, a moderate trail in Iceland that we did over the summer. And so this hike was, you could track my heart right there. So this is that downhill. So it wasn't demanding by my heart rate, but this is pretty much moderate to vigorous activity for 7 hours a day over something that my buddies' heart rate monitors were at 90 to 100. So just consistent effort to try to do something that most people just kind of do. Now, this was not hard. It was just energetically demanding. The downhill part sucks, and I get frustrated with that. But the reason that I like the little catch line of why I care about walking is to be fit enough so I can make Gordon mad. I already told that joke, and he knows about it, So day 3 of the Lagerwege, this is how I hike. This is actually not how I hike normally because like an idiot, you never get hurt on the trail. I was putting up my tent, wanted to grab a rock, was too lazy to do something normal, so I bent like this, and I was like, oh, that's how it feels when you throw your back out. But luckily, I just pulled a glute med, a super easy muscle, but you're in the backcountry, you got to walk it out. So that's personally, the ability to stay fit enough and to walk is this. And this is about the max. I can't run, can't squat, can't do it, but I can put a 20-pound pack on my weight, do a moderate hiking trail with friends, and have fun. Pretty simple, right? Now, personally, that's why I care about walking, but we need some dough, right? So why I started to worry about walking as a paycheck. Graduate school, exercise physiology, well-trained cyclist. Small lab, we weren't doing anything that was clinically relevant. Scientifically cool, learned some skills and all that nice stuff. But I needed to grow scientifically. So I was fortunate to get a position as a postdoctoral fellow under Christopher Cardozo at the James J. Peters VA Med Center in the Bronx, New York, that has an internationally renowned spinal cord injury clinical program. They were the leaders, international leaders, in the Bill Bauman and Ann Spungen that ran that, to recognize that spinal cord injury, we all recognize the damage to the spinal cord, the primary injury, but they have unique secondary consequences from the injury that are specific to spinal cord injury. Reproductive issues, urinary issues, digestive issues, all of these things go along that they were the first to systematically describe. So fortunate to get enough in that position, but I wasn't really interested in doing clinical work. I wanted to get animal skills. So I was actually doing animal work in this lab. So this is Chris's lab, these 4 windows right here. This is Chris's office where he often slept because he just fell asleep in his office. So that's when I started to worry about walking. Our goal was to find ways to make mice walk and function better after spinal cord injury. Can't ask a human to get a spinal cord injury. You can, they'll say no. There's not, it could be pretty much argued that getting a spinal cord injury is one of the worst things that can happen to you physically. So my job was to work with Chris to find new drugs, to make new mice, to do cool stuff, to try to improve how a mouse walks, to hopefully find some path that's very rare to go from a mouse to a rat to a non-human primate to a human for a spinal cord injury. So very scientifically rewarding to learn the skills that I had, but then being in a clinical center exposes you to people's spinal cord injury. So to give some scope about spinal cord injury, most of them, I shouldn't say most of them, but around 44% of them are functionally paralyzed, AIS, AB, so motor paralyzed. Some can feel senses. And in the US, there's 305,000 of them, with 18,000 new injuries per year. Why this is such a key for the VA, and why the VA housed this internationally renowned center, is that the VA is the largest SCI care provider in the world. You're a veteran, you get a spinal cord injury, whether in combat, whether you had an accident at your house, whether you get into a car wreck, the VA becomes your care provider. And outside of the health, and we'll say some good things, nothing good about spinal cord injury, but the numbers are there. The average age of this is going up. So spinal cord injury used to be thought of as a young male idiot syndrome. 20 years old, most likely under the influence, driving fast, and you get into a car wreck. Well, cars have gotten safer, and so these car wrecks don't happen. The majority of these injuries still happen to young males, but what we've seen over the past 30 years is that this average has gone from 29 to 43, and car wrecks to falls. So now older adults are falling more and getting a spinal cord injury. But the costs of this are enormous. So if you have a high-level severe injury, so cervical level, The first year after injury, $1.5 million in healthcare costs alone. You likely have lost your job. You have other types of things that happen. But then after that, $250,000 per year, every year that you're alive. So if you're a young male, had that unfortunate accident, to your expected lifespan, it's $6 million in healthcare costs. And these costs are exorbitant even if you are functional, so motor functional, AISD, spinal cord injury, but you can still walk around with a walker, things along those lines. You're still paying $2 million a year. Life expectancy is still short. It has increased as medical care has improved and SCI-specific care has improved, but they still live about 6 to 14 years shorter, depending on the severity of the injury. And they are the least active people. There's nobody less active than someone with a spinal cord injury that is, conscious and capable of movement. So with our mice, we're trying to find ways to improve this. So my collaborator, Carlos Toro, was able to find this molecule that improved markers of neurogenesis after a spinal cord injury in a mouse. So this is going to sound, well, it is violent. It's violent injuries. Do a specialized surgery, hit a mouse spinal cord, and mice recover the ability to walk spontaneously after some of these types of injuries. They're not like humans. So we can track how well they recover after these injuries. So this is a marker of neurogenesis or neuroregeneration, or neurorecovery, neural regeneration. And we track their functional recovery. Oh, this is gnarly. It's like 7 feet behind. By this, what we call the BMS score. It's a special mouse scale. Someone has spent years of their life trying to perfect a way to measure how mice walk after spinal cord injury. So this is called the BASO mouse scale. And they show that this molecule improved it. Won't go into the mechanisms. I'm happy to talk afterwards about mechanisms, but you'll just be like, yeah, shut up. And I say that to talk about a really fancy mouse that we made. So we inhibited in your muscle, we actually won't get into. If you want to talk about the mechanisms, we can talk about it afterwards. But we made a very special, fancy, expensive mouse that did not have some stuff in muscle that it should after paralysis. And only in muscle. So these proteins are called connexins. They make the fancy channels that let your heart work. So there are tons of things that inhibit these, but they also inhibit how your heart works. I kind of like how my heart works. So this molecule found a way to inhibit it with doing other stuff. Yeah, good description, Zachary. Regardless, we knocked this out. It's highly related to this molecule that we have. And we were able to improve walking function in males and females and a different type of motor function where they have to grab a ladder rung. So go to the Bronx, get some postdoctoral training in how to make a mouse work, then get recruited to UAB. We finished this up. This is actually finished when I came down to IHMC. And I came down to IHMC for the hope to get, even though I'm in the world-renowned center of clinical, I worked in a clinical center with expertise in SCI. I came down here to hopefully try to work with Marcus and the robotics team to get an exoskeleton program up in spinal cord injury. So this is me working in this what's called the ReWalk exoskeleton. It's FDA approved to be used in people with spinal cord injury, but you have to meet specific thresholds. You have to be able to walk 0.4 meters per second in the device. You always have to have a partner with you. You cannot pilot it solo. And if you can remember what I said about the importance of being hands-free as a bipedal thing that we need for our evolution, we lose that. Our hands are no longer free. These are safety crutches that are required and mandated by the FDA. Robots and exoskeletons are not, the algorithms and actuators aren't smart enough or dependable enough yet to do independent stuff in people that can't feel. So this is hard to walk in as someone that has full feeling and function of those leg muscles. People with spinal cord injury can't feel anything. So they can't feel the sensation. Their balance is off. The stepping algorithms that you need are very difficult to do. And so that's why you have to have these safety crutches. So in the study that we proposed that scored okay, the reviews came back that just said, nobody's going to use exoskeletons, basically. And our collaborator, Ann Spungen, had the same thought. And this is what we would have asked our participants to do if we would have gotten funded. So you can see a ton of cool wires, fancy crutches. So the robotics team made this so we know how much force is going in and out of their arms. So Dr. Spungen ran this big study, 15-site VA clinical study with 161 people with spinal cord injury. They qualified for bone mineral density, which is a requirement to make sure when you stand up in these devices, you don't break your hip or you break your knee or you have a fracture. And the VA gave them a device. They said, here's an $80,000 exoskeleton. Use it. So this is the group that didn't get them, and this is the group that got them. No difference. So why is that? Those that had it walked 1.5 miles per month. That's the average. There were people that didn't use it at all because of this. So the reviewers of Marcus and my proposal really loved the exercise part that we had in it, but they just said it doesn't really matter because no one will use an exoskeleton. And Anne had the same thought too. So there's just this massive barrier to do something that could be incredibly impactful for those with SCI, being upright, being able to ambulate around your environment. Even if your hands are free, you have spinal cord injury, being upright, eye level with people. Their whole life they're getting looked down upon, which has a psychological effect. But if we think about having an exoskeleton, how do you transfer in and out of it? You need a partner. So these are all of these barriers that exist with trying to get people that need to be walking, that greatly benefit from walking. And for this, walking for them is not really functional. It's an exercise mimetic. Well, not a mimetic, it is exercise. And Anne told me, not off the record, they didn't publish that even the people that walked this amount had psychological benefits and bowel benefits. So most people with spinal cord injury they want to walk again. That's usually number one or number two, but they understand the reality that they probably won't. What they want to is they want to be able, if they're of childbearing age, to have kids and urinary and GI issues. Those are their quality of life things. And she reported that they didn't publish at the time, or it's in supplemental data, I can't remember, that they did benefit, even if they're only walking this amount of time. So, come here to do SCI research, and now I can't. So I have to start a new line of research. And this is pretty much what it's like. You jump, you have a bunch of failures, and hopefully something catches you. And so in the good old days, we call this riding on the coattails, right? So you find someone that has a history of success, and you ask them, how should we do this? So working with Marcus up at UAB and here, aging has always been somewhat of an interest, but never really involved with the outside of what we were doing in MotorPack. I did have experience with preclinical aging, looking at how mice responded from a laparotomy, so an opening, basically mimicking a general surgery. And I helped care for those animals and do the surgery and all that nice stuff. But don't want to make fun of anybody here, but you're all pretty old. Okay. So spinal cord injury, we can't sustain even if we got the grant. The population of spinal cord injury doesn't really exist here to sustain a big clinical trial to springboard a scientist like myself's career. You need something that the local community can actually provide. So we're all getting old. We all will age, no matter what we think. Even if we exercise every day, we might extend our lifespan 3 to 4 years. 3 to 4 years is a lot, but it's really not that much. But our population is getting older. So the goal is, here at IHMC, aging seems to be a good direction that could support a young scientist like myself. I'm not young, a middle-aged scientist like myself. But it also is highly related to walking. You don't want to walk slow, and walking is a cool thing to study. And if there are also general clinical markers of what fast, good, appropriate walking is. So if you can walk 0.8 meters per second, you can generally walk around your neighborhood pretty well. If you walk fast, you have less likely to be admitted to a hospital for something. So these are all documented things where walking speed can be correlated to quality of life measures that we're interested in, but also empirical data that shows your risk of survival decreases as you start to walk slower and slower and slower. So we know we need to walk 6,000 steps per day. And we want to, depending on your age, you generally want to walk about 1.2 meters per second. I'll walk 1.37, no big deal. But what happens with aging as well is we become more inefficient. So we actually use more energy per step that we walk. Now, I don't want to bring up those chimps again. But if we can remember, chimps are more inefficient when they walk, right? So as we get older, we move to the gait of a chimpanzee. And this happens right around the age of 65. So you start to, aging starts when you're 30. Like, you can't avoid that. So you exercise and you put off this threshold here, but it's going to come for you. And most of the time, it's around 65 where you hit this inflection point. And when you think of burning energy, you think, oh, that's a good thing. Burn energy, burn fat. But the inefficiency becomes because your whole system is not really that correlated well. Your muscles are firing at different rates. You go to contract your hamstring, but your hips fire, and then your quads fire. So you're just incredibly inefficient with your system because you're aging. That's what happens. And you have what is called this distal to proximal shift, which, as I said, young adults walk at their ankles. Older adults tend to walk at the hips. You walk, sorry, that was a you all. I'm assuming you're older than me. I did not mean that. But strides are shorter. There's a cognitive load because at some point you start to think about walking, which you don't normally do. And your stance is wider. So you walk with your hips kind of in front, trying to balance yourself. So this led me for my first coattail grabber honor situation, where Greg Sawicki, who is a scientist at Georgia Tech, and he's also a scientist here at IHMC, is an expert on this distal to proximal shift. He studied aging for a long time. And so I said, hey, Greg, he said that he was studying, going after this RFA, which is a request for applications. So this is a highly competitive award that the NIH puts out that's very specific. So in this case, it was understanding the mechanisms underlying the age-related changes, and you can read, to understand the mechanisms that go with biomechanics. So Greg said, yeah, you can join. So we wrote this pretty compelling application that we call ID Met. So what we want to do is take 120 people, 60 young adults, 60 older adults here at IHMC, and do all this cool stuff. We're going to take biopsies of the gastrocnemius, because that's that distal part, take biopsies of the vastus lateralis for the proximal part, do a bunch of motion capture, do ultrasounds of the joints, because as you age, your tendons become less plastic, or they become more stretchy. Your tendons have a lot to do with how well you walk. You really want short, compact tendons that store a lot of energy, so when you step, it springboards you up. And then the stuff that I'm most interested in, related to muscle, we can do cool biology. So we can do fiber type stuff. We can do mitochondrial assays and some molecular stuff. The second coattail was, well, this is actually the first one. I grabbed this one first, and then Greg's came on. But I don't co-lead this one formally. I help Marcus out a bit. But this is the study that we're doing here at IHMC that we call MAX. And again, this was an RFA, highly competitive. For this one, it funded 3 awards. Georgia Tech is the lead site that we're a part of. UMass Amherst is the other one, and Johns Hopkins. And Marcus's funds 3 as well here. UC Denver, University of Colorado Denver, and Mayo Clinic and Tufts. But this is trying to see how well the response of older adults to exercise is variable. So Marcus in our team wants to understand how this happens. There's my voice. Right on time. And we call this study MAX. And so the cool part, Marcus is in the back. This is his study. I have data that he hasn't never seen before. So a world premiere even to Marcus. But this is the study. So my study is not an intervention. Marcus's is. So you come for me, you come for a few visits. We take some muscle, have some fun, and then you leave. Here, you're here for up to 22 weeks, doing high intensity, highly supervised exercise training where you just get crushed in a good way. So the average step counts of people in Marcus's trial, there's 3 phases that Jeremy, Dr. McAdam back there, forgot to put the phases like I asked him to, so I'll call him out. So there's a phase 1 that's a wash-in where they're not doing any intervention. This is just them wearing an Oura ring for 2 weeks, and we track how many steps they have. This long portion here is phase 1, it's 12 weeks, and then 10 weeks of phase 2. Obviously, we only have a few people that have gone out here because the grant's not that old, but we can see it doesn't really change. That's not necessarily true because we take the ring off during the intervention phase, so it's underreporting that phase a little bit. But on average, the older adults that volunteer for Marcus's study, 7,000 steps. So we're on that good part of the curve. So this is the data. So response heterogeneity, the name of the game. This is after the 12 weeks of intervention, a key clinical test called the 6-minute walk test. How far can you walk in 6 minutes? Some people do better. Most people do better. A few people do worse. But in general, they walk faster. You walk faster, you cover more time. A 10-meter walk test. How fast can you walk 10 meters without it being a jog? Most people walk that faster, so their time goes down. This is their average walking speed, goes up. Some people don't. Interesting. Oh, I thought there was one more. But I'm at the end anyway. So acknowledgements. Obviously, this is all, here's our funding sources, main collaborators. I would be murdered by 2 other people if I didn't show this. We have 3 studies going on. I think most of you probably qualify for one of them. So this is Marcus's intervention. This is Dr. Nicole Rindos, 45 and above, and then this is my study here. And sorry I went a little bit over, but happy to answer questions, and if I can't answer, I'll hang out for a bit and do it.
Do you find there's a difference if you're walking on a treadmill versus like hiking or walking around a neighborhood? Is it better or worse one way or the other?
The best thing for you is to do whatever you will do the most. No, I mean, that's easy. Setting a behavior to do something you don't like to do is you're going to fail. If you don't like to do a certain task, somebody can say the best thing in the world for you is to do this type of thing, and if you hate it, you're not going to do it. So we can take general guidelines, 6,000 steps. No empirical, there's some data that shows that that's good. How you accumulate that is up to you. Now, I will argue what you can do that drives you the hardest, what's the most intense, the most difficult. Hiking, uphill terrain, it's a cognitive load, you have to think. That's certainly going to be more, in my mind, better than walking flat through East Hill on a street. Get on a trail, you have to plan a little bit, may have to, you might slip, you may have to make a powerful movement that recruits a large thing. You may have an incline like I did. When was the last time you had your heart rate at 170? Well, it may have been a while. We need to do that. It's incredibly important that we stress our body to the max every now and then, because at some point you're going to need to, and if you don't, and you don't have that capacity, it's going to be bad. So the general guidelines would be do what you like, do it as intense as possible, and as you start to get better, you have to keep that intensity up because it's pretty easy to maintain. We want to grow. We want to get better. So I would say get some trekking poles, go find a 30-degree incline hiking trail in Mount Woodson, and go crush it. But I mean, in serious, it's whatever you think you're going to do the most, that's the best one. In my mind, there's some data that will say, like, obviously 3 sets by 12 at this intensity, this many miles, this amount of time. There's data that supports that. But if you don't want to do it, you do the thing that you'll do.
Great presentation, by the way. Increasing your gait, do you think that'll actually help with maybe some longevity? Or if you're going to do a walk, try to increase the gait. Is that something that I should take away that we should take?
What do you mean by increased gait?
I'm sorry, length of step.
So if you can improve your stride length and that becomes a habit, it depends on how your biomechanics change. So to improve any task, you just do it more. So walking more is going to improve how you walk. If you make a strategic decision, that's basically an exercise prescription. You go to the gym, I'm going to do 10 more pounds today, right? Well, I'm going to focus on, I'm going to tape my treadmill and every 2-meter stride, I'm going to hit. I don't know the empirical evidence for that. I would suggest that if you are able to improve your stride consistently, and that becomes your new habit, that you would walk faster by nature. I have no data that in my mind that would actually support that. I could be 100% wrong. But my guess is just like any other thing. You train yourself, you notice you walk slower. Well, I'm going to take the same amount of steps in the same time, but I'm going to walk further. By definition, you have to walk faster. It's whether that becomes ingrained as the natural behavior as opposed to something that you have to spend a lot of energy thinking about.
Your thing had heel to toe, and I was wondering if you increase your gait, that's forcing you more on your heel and forcing you to more efficiency, I guess, but you're walking less chimpanzee.
Yes, we should all strive to be less chimpanzee. Well, there's anytime that if you increase your stride that's past your unnatural, you're out of your own natural. So if you're trying to extend what you are naturally, we all have natural gaits. I mean, there's algorithms that can predict somebody who by their gait better than their face, right? We all have unique gaits. We can talk afterwards, and I'll let other people ask questions.
Hi there.
Hi.
I'm Dr. Lynn Varan. I'm a physical therapist locally, and I work primarily with runners, but everybody has to walk. That's always my premise. But one thing that in the study, I noticed that the selected muscles were the lateral vastalis and the lateral gastroc. But a couple things. One, for a lot of runners, younger, 16, 14, 15 years old, up through the age of 80 of the clients I work with, the medial muscles are the ones that tend to be the less active, so I'm curious why those muscles. And then the other question that I had too, as kind of a follow-up, is we say that a lot of people's, especially the plantar flexors, the muscles tend to weaken, but I see that even in young adults or young teens, and so it feels like that inflection point is not just necessarily happening as we get older, but it's almost habitual, maybe in the lifestyle that we lead. And so when I start to see people improve that, it starts to improve regardless of their age, whether they're 15 years old or 70 years old. So I'm curious about the selection of the exercises and what the focus is to improve people's walking regardless of age.
So the first question, there is nothing I would love better than to biopsy every single muscle of the leg, arms, chest, ab. The vastus lateralis and the gastroc are safe. There's no major nerve that goes to there. There's no major blood vessel. If you want to go after the RF, if you want to go after the hamstring, they're less anatomically predictable, and you could do a substantial amount of secondary damage that's not worth it. So we don't risk it. Lateral gastroc is incredibly safe. Vastus lateralis is incredibly safe. Been involved with around 25,000 biopsies. No issues. You move to an RF, even if you do the medial gastroc, you open up that. So there's nothing. So let's say we're a part of a study and we open up the knee for a knee replacement. We take all those muscles, right? Because they're there at the surgery. The second part of the question, there has been a growing movement to use walking speed as a biomarker, where you go to the doctor, you get a blood draw, you get a walking test. Over time, your walking speed is starting to decrease. Now, with kids, you see it in the clinic. Walking speeds are down. Physical activity is certainly going to drive that. The data that I showed, the outcomes of that are nowhere, those are secondary outcomes. The outcomes of the trial are what you would associate with more traditional resistance exercise and aerobic fitness. So those, if we wanted to target walking, we would have designed a whole different study to maximize that. Those are completely secondary. Surrogates for improved function, but not, the goal of the study was not to improve muscle function. The goal of our study is to increase their physical responsiveness to exercise. I think I answered that. Okay.
Time for one more question.
Oh, thank you. And thank you for your presentation. That was quite inspiring. I was curious if in your studies of diseases or conditions this helps. Have you noticed anything for chronic fatigue or extreme energy? Because I know loved ones who like to exercise, they're motivated to exercise, and they can't get to it. It's impacting their exercise, and it almost has a catch-20.
Yeah, so chronic fatigue syndrome is one of the few things where exercise might be contraindicated, where it's difficult for them. So a doctor doesn't want you to, similar to peripheral artery disease. Sometimes it's very painful for people to walk. I've never done anything with that, so I can't give you a good answer, and I don't know the literature. But my gut reaction would be always to tell someone to do as much as you can. We are a stress-based system. We have to stress ourselves, and we have to recover. That's a cop-out answer. But I just don't know the literature well enough.
I thought honest response. Let's thank our speaker for a wonderful talk.